Circumcision Party. These are the same people that plagued Paul everywhere he went. They weren't necessarily unbelievers. I mean, some of them might have been since he was in Jerusalem, but there were a lot of disciples of Yeshua who would have been considered part of the Circumcision Party. And these are people who believe that you must be a Jew in order to be saved. It's not that they weren't necessarily preaching a salvation by works the way that we normally think of it.
Right.
They were preaching you must become a Jew by works, and then as a Jew, you are eligible for salvation.
Correct. Yeah.
It's
a big misunderstanding of the passage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this controversy keeps coming up. It comes up again in Acts 15, and Paul addresses it in several of his letters. And it was never about whether we should obey the law of God. That was never the controversy. It was always about why. And do we need to obey all this extra stuff, all these Jewish rules that they piled on top of God's law? And that's what the Circumcision Party was teaching. When they talked about the traditions of Moses, they weren't talking about the commandments that God had given through Moses. They were talking about the list of 18 different steps you had to take in order to become a Jew, and the final one was circumcision. And that was never God's plan. There was never a set of rules that you had to go through to become an Israelite. And in the first century, for the most part, the word Jew and Israelite were just interchangeable words. It's just, Paul called himself a Jew, even though he was from the tribe of Benjamin. The Greeks, anybody who was of the religion of the Jews in Judea, anybody who lived in Judea or were descended from those people, they called them all Jews. They didn't really differentiate.
Well, they thought that salvation was only for them.
Right.
And that's them being the circumcised. Now, this is when the first time we're seeing Gentiles are coming in.
Correct.
So
it's confusing.
They never anticipated that.
Yeah, at least first time.
They hadn't imagined this would happen.
Do we know how many sects of Judaism had such strict regulations on interacting with Gentiles as far as eating with?
I'm only vaguely familiar with 4 groups of Judaisms, if you want to call them that. The Hellenists, Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. Those are the only ones I have any real familiarity with.
And the Essenes were like already separated.
Yeah, they were the separatists. They were probably the strictest in their own way.
And so the way was becoming the fifth.
Yeah.
But the Pharisees clearly had rules, but there were different factions of Pharisees as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So would they have had different regulations?
I'm sure they would have. I don't know what those differences were, but I'm sure they did.
Because it sounds like it wasn't all the Jewish, it didn't seem like it was universally accepted, the strictness of interaction with Gentiles.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where the rub is that there were, I guess what they would call the party of the circumcision, which were much more strict about their interactions with Gentiles in terms of everything they do is unclean, therefore
like they are unclean.
We can't participate.
Yeah. And there were some things like that almost all of the Jews agreed on, is that you can't go and eat in a Gentile's house because you don't know what's been contaminated and what hasn't. And they might have different reasons. Like some of them might say, well, because they're a Gentile, they might deliberately put pork blood in your whatever. But,
or raise a cup to a god.
Yeah, who knows what. But the way, at least starting about now, actually even before that with Yeshua, like the woman at the well, they were the first, at least in this era, of the Jewish groups to openly accept Gentiles. There were periods in Israelite history where Gentiles were openly accepted and invited to become Israelites. Depends on how you define invite. Because when Levi and Simeon sacked Shechem, they didn't exactly invite them to become Israelites.
It was a forced upon invitation.
And it was the same thing.
It was like the Roman Inquisition.
Yeah, well, it was the same thing with the Edomites. When John, the Maccabee, when he conquered Edom, he forced them all to convert to Judaism. Mm-hmm. And over time, most of them just became absorbed into Judah, and they were considered Jews.
It's like modern day baptism.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But it's them too, you having to be a part of our doctrine of what we think faith is. And they had put, like we all do in all of our religions, churchianities, we put up these walls of doctrine that doesn't let people
Mhm.
in and differentiates us from them, So they're
Right.
like dealing with this doctrine of men. And Peter, when he's even explaining this to them, he's like, I remember the words of the Lord said that John baptized you with water, but I'm going to pour my spirit on you. And they didn't understand that yet until Shavuot, until Pentecost came. And up to that point, they were all Galileans, So now all of a sudden it's like, and right there at Pentecost, the gospel was given in everybody's language. It's like it's showing that this opportunity is
For everybody.
expanding here, and the Jews thought they had a monopoly on salvation.
And the one true God.
And they did. I mean, Israel has that monopoly. But yeah, they never anticipated the Gentiles to come in without becoming a Jew first.
And you also have
But they have faith before Judaism.
the political, which a lot of times starts mingling in with the religious, of course. But the political stuff was creeping into that, or had been flooded, let's just
Herod's
say.
temple, yeah.
Maybe it didn't creep, maybe it flooded. But their protection as a class, able to have the privileges that they had, you could see how all of this was coming together to create this force to protect themselves as a protected class.
And it was a part of their way of control.
Yeah, and like you're pointing out, we have the exact same thing going on in almost every branch of Christianity, Hebrew roots, whatever. Like with our version of the Sadducees, thinking of high church Christianity, the Greek Orthodox or in the Catholics, and they have their list of things that you have to follow all this stuff in order to be one of us. Now, maybe you can be saved, maybe not, depending on who's Pope this year. But but you're not really part of the in kingdom unless you're doing all the sacraments. You're coming to confession and you're going to mass and all this stuff. And the Orthodox have their version of it. And the Protestants do too. Like some branches of Protestants, if you're not speaking in tongues, you're not saved. You haven't really had the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And
You
with
can't dance or drink with someone.
Yeah. And
They all put these.
in the Torah communities, you've got Messianic Jewish congregations that won't let you be an elder or participate in any official way if you're not ethnically Jewish. You can convert and go through all the steps to become a Jew, just
Then you
like
can
the
do it.
party of
Which
circumcision.
is essentially what this was talking about.
Yeah.
And it's like they're missing.
Yeah, and
what's
they're
happening.
not going so far as to say you can't be saved.
Right.
But they're still putting up that wall. They just moved it back a little bit.
But that's essentially what was happening here. They were saying you got to become a Jew 1st
Mm-hmm.
and then you can be saved. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's both.
Yeah, or
And
they
it's
might have
no.
moved it a little bit differently, saying you can be saved, but now you have to become a Jew.
Yeah.
Which is also
Yeah,
wrong.
who knows? Yeah. That makes sense.
On the Peter's vision thing, I learned that it refers to prophecy coming true from Hosea 2. So if you go to Hosea 2, 18, you'll see that relation. It says, on that day I will make a covenant with them, or for them, with the beasts of the field and the birds of the air and the creatures that crawl on the ground. So there's this linking right there, and then this is where it's basically this restoration of the Gentile or whatever the scattered Israel. He said, "I will say, to those called not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God." I remember learning that there was this relation between the prophecy in Hosea too and Peter's.
That's interesting. I don't think I've made that connection before.
That's really
I like
good.
it.
Yeah, and apparently too, like the idea of like Israel having Gentiles among them who are willing to worship their God, like that had been happening all along. But apparently by this time, it's like there was so much more going on in the religious world. There was so much more organization by that time, and there were so many more groups vying for power by that time that I could see how this would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really what it comes down to. It's like we want control. We want the right to be called the only people who get access to God. You know, and I think every man-made religion has really pretty much done that. We want to be known as the only people who have God.